The November wind sliced through the cemetery outside Columbus, Ohio, carrying the smell of wet leaves and fresh earth. It was the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones, the kind that reminded you life could change in a single morning. My name is Claire Carter. 3 days earlier, I buried the only person who had ever believed my hands were worth something. Now I was about to discover that my mother had spent the last 2 years planning for the day everyone else underestimated me. I arrived at the cemetery alone in my 12-year-old pickup truck. The parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership. Black Mercedes, BMWs, Cadillacs. Every executive from Carter Home Furnishing seemed to be there. My older brother, Nathan Carter, stood near the entrance wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His wife, Vanessa, greeted guests with polished smiles as if they were hosting a company gala instead of attending a funeral. Nobody noticed me, and honestly, that wasn't unusual. For 20 years, I'd been the daughter who worked with fabric instead of spreadsheets. While Nathan climbed the corporate ladder inside our mother's company, I opened a small upholstery shop 20 miles away. I repaired antique furniture, restored heirlooms, hand-stitched leather chairs. It wasn't glamorous, but every piece I finished carried my name. Mom understood that. Everyone else treated it like a hobby. As I walked toward the graveside, Vanessa finally spotted me. Her eyes traveled from my boots to my coat before reaching my face. "You made that yourself, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "It looks homemade." I smiled. "It paid my rent 6 years in a row." She gave a tight laugh that wasn't really a laugh. Some people don't know what to do when confidence doesn't come wrapped in expensive labels. The service began. The pastor spoke about kindness, about family, about legacy. I looked at my mother's casket and remembered a completely different woman than the one everyone else described. She wasn't soft. She wasn't easy. She believed every promise should be backed by hard work. When I was 14, I ruined an expensive leather chair while learning to sew. I expected her to yell. Instead, she placed another piece of leather in front of me. "Again," she said. "I already failed." "No." She shook her head. "You practiced once." That sentence shaped the rest of my life. When customers brought me furniture everyone else called worthless, I remembered those words. Practice once more. Try again. Repair what others throw away. The burial ended. Executives offered Nathan their condolences. Several even congratulated him on the future of the company. None of them bothered speaking to me. It didn't hurt anymore. It had become normal years ago. Everyone drove back to my mother's estate for the reading of the will. The mansion looked exactly the same. White columns, large oak doors. The workshop still sat behind the house where Mom had built her first furniture prototypes by hand. I hadn't stepped inside that workshop in nearly 15 years. Nathan had made sure of that. Inside the library, the family attorney opened a thick leather folder. Nathan sat confidently at the front. Vanessa already had a notebook ready. I remained standing near the fireplace. Nobody offered me a chair. The attorney began reading. The lake house? Nathan. Investment accounts? Nathan. Vacation property? Nathan. Company headquarters? Nathan. Corporate shares? Nathan. The room grew quieter with every paragraph. Finally, the attorney adjusted his glasses. To my daughter, Claire Carter, every head turned toward me. I leave my personal sewing cabinet and everything inside. Silence. Then someone laughed. Just one person. But that was enough. Vanessa leaned toward Nathan. "I guess your mother always knew Claire liked old tools." Nathan smiled. "It suits her." The attorney closed the folder. The reading is complete. That was it. 40 years of building one of Ohio's largest furniture companies, and my inheritance was an old wooden sewing cabinet. An assistant rolled it into the room. The cabinet was worn smooth from decades of use. Brass handles. Oak wood darkened with age. The moment I touched it, I smelled cedar oil, machine grease, fresh cotton thread. It smelled like my childhood. Like afternoons spent beside Mom while she quietly taught me stitches no factory machine could copy. I thanked the assistant and lifted the cabinet myself. It was heavier than expected. As I reached the front hallway, something shifted inside. Paper. Not tools. Not thread. Paper. I almost opened it. Then Nathan blocked the doorway. "You planning to argue?" he asked. "No." "You sure?" "I came to bury Mom." He folded his arms. "Good." His smile never reached his eyes. "Because investors are still here. Don't embarrass the family." "I've done nothing." "Exactly." He stepped closer. So leave before you start. I walked toward the front porch. Halfway down the steps, his hand clamped around my arm. Hard. People turned immediately. Nathan raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. I'm sorry, he said with a disappointed sigh. My sister thought Mom was leaving her part of the company. Several guests looked at me with pity. One investor shook his head. Another whispered something I couldn't hear. Nathan gently, but firmly, guided me toward the driveway like I was an inconvenience that needed removing. I could have pulled away. Years of lifting heavy furniture had made me stronger than most people guessed. But if I fought back, I'd become exactly the story Nathan wanted everyone to believe. So I stayed silent. At the front gate, he finally released my arm. I hope you find peace, he said loud enough for nearby guests. Then he turned around and walked back toward the mansion. Within seconds, he was laughing with investors again, as if I had never existed. I placed the sewing cabinet beside my truck. Cold wind rushed across the empty road. I rested both hands on the lid. I would go home, finish a customer's antique rocking chair, forget this entire day. Then headlights appeared around the curve. A vintage black Mercedes rolled slowly toward the estate. It stopped beside me. An elderly gentleman stepped out wearing a dark overcoat and leather gloves. He studied my face for several seconds. Claire Carter? Yes. Without another word, he opened a leather portfolio. Inside rested a cream-colored document sealed with dark blue wax. He looked toward the mansion where laughter still drifted across the wind. Then back at me. He held out the document. Mrs. Carter, his voice remained calm. The board of directors has been waiting for its chairwoman. My heart stopped. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The wind still carried faint laughter from my mother's estate, where Nathan was probably accepting congratulations as the new owner of Carter Home Furnishings. Meanwhile, a complete stranger had just called me chairwoman. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. The elderly man smiled. I don't make mistakes anymore. I'm too old to afford them. He extended his hand. My name is Benjamin Hayes. I served on your mother's board of directors for 34 years. I also made her a promise. I looked down at the document in my hands. Across the top were the words, Emergency Board Authorization. Beneath them, my mother's signature. Benjamin opened the passenger door. Get in, Claire. Your mother knew exactly what today would look like. 10 minutes later, we arrived at the company headquarters. The parking lot was almost empty. Most employees had attended the funeral. As I stepped inside carrying the old sewing cabinet, something felt different. People weren't staring at my clothes. They were staring at the cabinet. A gray-haired receptionist stood up immediately. Good afternoon, Ms. Carter. It was the first time anyone inside this building had addressed me with respect. Benjamin led me into the executive boardroom. The long walnut table was surrounded by 12 leather chairs. One chair stood at the very end, larger than the others. Benjamin pulled it out. Please. I hesitated. I don't belong there. He looked directly into my eyes. Your mother disagreed. Slowly, I sat down. Benjamin unlocked the sewing cabinet with a tiny brass key he removed from his wallet. Your mother gave me this 2 years ago? The top drawer slid open. Inside were ordinary sewing supplies. Needles, thread, buttons. Nothing unusual. Then Benjamin pressed against the wooden side panel. A hidden compartment clicked open. My heart skipped. Inside rested 3 thick envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The first contained stock certificates. The second held handwritten letters. The third contained legal documents. Benjamin placed the stock certificates in front of me. Read the percentage. I swallowed. 51%. He nodded. Controlling interest. I looked up. But Nathan inherited the company. No, he inherited the title. You inherited the power. I stared at him. Why would my mother do this? Benjamin leaned back. Because she watched both of her children for years. One learned how to sell furniture. The other learned how to build trust. He pointed toward my hands. Your mother visited your upholstery shop many times. I frowned. No, she didn't. Benjamin smiled gently. She never told you. She came after closing. She'd sit in her car across the street. She watched customers hug you after you restored family heirlooms. She watched you repair furniture people said couldn't be saved. She watched how you treated people when nobody important was watching. Tears blurred my vision. I never saw her. You weren't supposed to. She wanted the truth. Benjamin handed me one of the letters. The envelope simply read, "For Claire." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. My mother's handwriting filled the page. If you're reading this, it means Nathan believed appearances were enough. If he allowed you to leave believing you had nothing, then he has already proven why this company cannot belong to him. A business survives because people trust the hands behind it, not the voice in front of it. I stopped reading. I couldn't see through the tears. Benjamin waited patiently. When she was diagnosed, he said softly, she called every board member. She asked us one question. What matters more? Profit or character? Every single director gave the same answer. Character. The boardroom door suddenly opened. A nervous assistant stepped inside. Mr. Hayes, Nathan just called. Benjamin wasn't surprised. What did he say? He's bringing the investors here. He wants the board to formally announce him as the new chairman. Benjamin slowly smiled. Perfect. The assistant looked confused. Benjamin stood. Please ask every director to attend. The meeting starts in 30 minutes. She hurried away. I looked at him. I don't even know what I'm doing. You don't need to. You only need the truth. Half an hour later, luxury cars filled the parking lot. Nathan entered the building surrounded by investors, attorneys, and executives. He was smiling, laughing, completely certain the day belonged to him. As he pushed open the boardroom door, his smile disappeared. Because I was already sitting in the chairwoman's seat. Nathan looked from me to Benjamin, to the stock certificates lying on the table. What is she doing here? Nobody answered. Then Benjamin quietly slid the original ownership documents across the table. Nathan's face slowly lost all color. And before anyone spoke another word, the boardroom doors opened again. An elderly employee walked inside carrying a thick box labeled, "Internal Audit, Confidential." I believe, the old man said calmly, everyone needs to see what's inside before this meeting begins. Nathan froze. For the first time that day, he looked afraid. The boardroom fell completely silent. Every eye shifted from Nathan to the gray storage box sitting in the middle of the table. Across the lid in bold black letters were the words, "Internal Audit, Confidential." The elderly employee who carried it inside was Thomas Reed. He had worked for Carter Home Furnishings for 38 years. Long before Nathan ever walked into his first office, Thomas looked directly at the board. Margaret Carter asked me to protect these records until the day after her funeral. Nathan forced a laugh. This is ridiculous. Whatever's in that box has nothing to do with today. Thomas didn't answer him. Instead, he handed a sealed envelope to Benjamin Hayes. Benjamin opened it and passed it around the table. It contained a signed letter from my mother. Every director read it in silence. Benjamin finally looked up. Margaret requested that this letter be read only if ownership of the company was ever challenged. Nathan's confidence began to fade. Benjamin stood. He read the final paragraph aloud. A business can survive bad markets. It cannot survive dishonest leadership. The person who repairs trust deserves to lead more than the person who simply inherits a title. The room became so quiet I could hear the rain tapping against the windows. Thomas opened the audit box. Inside were financial reports, emails, signed contracts, and years of internal investigations. One by one, the documents revealed the truth. Nathan had approved overpriced supplier contracts that benefited his friends. He ignored repeated quality complaints to increase profits. Employee safety repairs had been delayed to save money. Several experienced craftsmen had resigned after warning management about declining standards. Every complaint had been documented. Every warning had been ignored. Benjamin placed the final report in front of the board. The evidence is clear. The previous owner knew exactly what was happening. Nathan slammed both hands onto the table. She never said a word to me, Benjamin answered calmly. She didn't have to. She changed the future instead. Nathan turned toward me. You planned this. I slowly shook my head. No, Mom did. For the first time in years. My brother had no answer. The board chair called for a vote. All those in favor of recognizing Claire Carter as the lawful chairwoman and chief executive officer under the founders' voting shares. One hand rose, then another, until every director had voted. Unanimous. Benjamin smiled at me. Congratulations, Madam Chair. Nathan stared around the room in disbelief. You can't do this. The company belongs to me. Benjamin quietly slid the original stock certificate across the table. It never did. Security entered the room a few moments later. Not to arrest Nathan, simply to escort him from the executive offices while the transition was completed. He looked at me before leaving. I was family. I met his eyes. You still are. But family doesn't excuse choices. He lowered his head and walked away without another word. For the first time that day, the building felt peaceful. Over the next several months, things began to change. We restored employee pensions that had been frozen. Safety upgrades were completed in every factory. Experienced craftsmen who had resigned were invited back. Quality, not shortcuts, became our priority again. One Friday afternoon, I unlocked my mother's old sewing cabinet in my new office. Hidden beneath the bottom drawer was one final envelope. Inside was a small photograph. I was 9 years old, sitting beside my mother in the workshop, proudly holding the very first chair I had repaired. On the back she had written, "The strongest hands are not the ones that take, they are the ones that rebuild." I smiled through tears. Then I carried that photograph into the company lobby. Instead of hanging a portrait of myself, I framed that picture of my mother and placed it where every employee and every visitor would see it. Because Carter Home Furnishings had never been built on wealth. It had been built by honest hands, and honest hands would always be its greatest legacy.